Hello, and welcome to episode 34 of Sir Astro's Marvel Crisis Protocol painting series. In this episode I'll be painting Frankenstein's monster from the Monsters Unleashed character pack by Atomic Mass Games. This is a character that doesn't have a strict uniform or colour scheme of course, so you could choose whatever colours you like, but I've chosen to base my colour choices on the fantastic character art by Patrick Brown. Let's begin. As usual, you can see I've primed the figure in black and provided some grey and white zenithal highlights from above. I also chose to dry fit the monster to the base for now. As I often like to do, I'm starting by painting the eyes, and I'm using bright ivory, followed with some black to paint the surrounding area along with the pupils. Next I'm painting the skin, where I'm using a roughly equal mix of dark warm grey and purple. For the hair, I'm using a mix of coal black and dark purple. For the green top, I'm first mixing a shadow tone using dark camo green and some burnt orange. To help speed things along a bit, I've chosen to sketch in the initial volumes rather than highlight up from a dark base colour in layers, so I'm also mixing in some yellow-green to create an initial mid or highlight tone. I'm now placing some of my initial shadow tones. And here I'm using the lighter tone to loosely place my initial highlights, doing some rough blending along the way. We will of course be doing some refining and additional highlighting here in a while, so it's okay if things look a bit scrappy for now. And I'm now painting the upper arms. Next I'm creating a gradient for the fur vest. Here I'm using dark umber mixed with purple for the shadow tone, blended up to some light umber for the mid-tone, and I'm going to try mixing some golden brown and shadow flesh for the highlights. And once again simply blocking in the values, followed with a bit of wet blending. Moving on to the trousers, I'm using a mix of blue-black and dark purple for the shadows, some dark grey-blue for the mid-tones, and I'll be adding faded ultramarine and some bright ivory for the highlights. I find blocking in the values like this to be a pretty fun way to work, as opposed to starting with a single dark base tone and gradually highlighting up in layers. Both approaches are valid and have their place of course. Next I'm painting the feet using dark umber and light umber for the areas of shadow and highlight respectively. I then chose to shade them down with a mix of Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade. And for the chain, I'm thinning some blue-black down with some glaze and wash medium to create kind of a speed paint. Finally, I'm painting the ground using the same approach I took with the Tomb of Dracula terrain pack in the previous episode, which mostly means dry brushing progressively lighter tones over a dark base. We can also tint some of the individual flagstones to create some tonal variation and provide some edge highlighting. And I'm now gluing him into place. Before starting on the highlights, I'm first providing some black lining to help with the overall sense of definition. So I'm getting into all of the joins between the clothing and where the clothing meets the skin. And we can of course tidy things up as needed. I'm now going to highlight the most important area, which is the skin, where I'll simply be adding increasing amounts of faded green to the purplish grey base tone. The resulting look should appear quite greyish, but with a sickly luminosity provided by the subtle levels of green in the highlights. I'm going to initially focus on the left hand to check that I'm happy with my colour choices before moving on to the rest. Along the way, I'm picking out the raised stitching, firstly using black-brown, then highlighted up with the addition of some khaki to help them stand out. And here I'm just glazing a little of the purple into some of the shadow and midtones to give a gentle boost to the saturation. I'm now moving on to the rest of the skin. Here we really want to bring out the structure of the face. Where there's not much room to manoeuvre the brush, we can use a little stippling action. Moving on to the clothing, since we've already established a reasonable sense of volume, you could really do as much or as little additional highlighting as you like. I'm going to give a bit of a boost to the green top, firstly with the yellow-green, then with the addition of some pale yellow. Given the nature of the character, I don't want too clean a finish, and will be generating a bit of texture as I go, using some little repeated lines and bits of stippling. Here I'm adding some of the pale yellow for the brightest highlights. I also chose to brush some additional burnt orange into the shadows. For the fur top, I'm returning to the upper end of the gradient we made earlier and simply picking out a few of the individual bits of raised texture. And I'm now returning to the gradient we made for the legs, where I'm just pushing up the values, doing a fair bit of refining, and playing with the textures along the way. We also chose to incorporate a little of the purple into the highlights to help unify the overall look. And here I also decided to brush a little of the burnt orange into the shadows, which once again helps to unify the colour scheme. I'm now sharpening the definition of the feet and adding some fairly bright highlights with the addition of some khaki to the brown base tone. I'm pushing the levels here to create a worn, leathery appearance. Next I'm highlighting the hair, where I'm adding some bright ivory to the dark purple base tone in a few stages. There's nothing special about the brush I'm using here, except that it's pretty old and lost quite a few hairs through misuse, giving me the slender shape that can be useful for work like this. I like my hair highlights to go pretty bright, yet concentrated, to create a glossy appearance and to really help frame the face. I'm now mixing some bright ivory into some blue black and adding a few glinting highlights to the chain. And here I chose to create a more rusty look with some thinned burnt orange. I'm I'm now moving around the model, adding one or two final touches of texture and highlight. And this completes Frankenstein's monster. Thank you for joining me. I do hope you have enjoyed the episode. As usual, you can find product lists in the video description, along with links to all of the places I can be found online, including the various social media and music platforms, as well as my Patreon page if you'd like to help support what I do. As always, my deepest thanks go to my amazing patrons for funding this work. Join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures from Marvel Crisis Protocol. Happy painting!